So in the last episode of the story called There Is No Tomorrow, I told the first part of our journey, which was myself, my partner Kim, our friends Daniel and Elaine, and I's expedition from Point Hope to Point Ley in the Arctic of Alaska. And at Point Ley, Kim and I continued on. So if you aren't up to speed yet, go back and watch that first video. And then, this is part 2 of the story, which is titled There Is No Tomorrow. And this one is Point Hope to Utqiagvik by Fat Bike and Packraft. Through still water on a rare calm morning, I paddled one final forward stroke and let my packraft lazily drift the last few feet to shore. When my bow made contact, I stepped onto the beach below the village of Point Ley, known locally and in its Untitled language as Kali, and swatted at the mosquitoes buzzing around my head. Before I began to unstrap the bike from the bow of my raft, I turned toward the lagoon and watched my 3 traveling companions make landfall. "I'm getting on the plane with Elaine from here," our friend Daniel said. I wasn't surprised. For the last several days, Daniel had been withdrawn and suffering in silence as a sore throat and general malaise overtook him. Human-powered expeditions are hard in the best of times, but when compounded with sickness, they become insufferable. We could all sense his misery over the previous days as he stoically forged through. From here on, it would just be Kim and I. As we rode our bikes around and got our bearings, the village seemed energized. 4-wheelers pulled loaded trailers to and fro, kids were outside playing and riding bikes, and many people stood in front of their houses, butchering and processing meat. "Welcome to Kali," everyone said as we passed. The day before, the community had taken 33 beluga whales, and today was Nalakatak, the spring whaling festival. Auspicious timing on our part. People gathered outside the school and into the gymnasium. Tray upon tray of food were being carried and set forth for the upcoming feast. Kids flocked to us and our freakish-looking oversized bikes. "Can I try?" they asked. "If my bike can withstand what I just put it through, I don't see how you can hurt it," Kim said, as she stabilized her bike for an enthusiastic little boy. Me next," came the cacophony. 5 days of prepackaged food awaited us at the post office, which we'd sent from home 2 weeks earlier. As we reorganized the bags on our bikes to make room for the resupply and a redistribution of group gear Daniel had been carrying, people from the village stopped to ask us questions and offer advice. "Nalakatak is beginning. Come eat," they told us. Inside the gymnasium, we sat at the school cafeteria lunch tables that had been set up for the feast. Round after round of food was passed out, with elders respectfully being served first. We were treated to a delicious traditional meal of native food: boiled beluga, bird soup, black and white muktuk, fry bread, and sweets. While eating, we received advice from one of the whaling captains and others. Our biggest concern about the way ahead was finding fresh water. On an unrolled map, fingers full of wisdom and local knowledge pointed out our best options. After the meal and before the dancing began, we were again surrounded by kids. They each in turn told us stories of Inupiat lore, excitedly cutting one another off to tell their versions of Sela, the big mouth baby, or the woman in white. Within these kids were the ancient stories passed down through millennia. In their capable care, Inupiat culture is safe. 2 days later, Kim and I crouched low behind our bikes as a herd of caribou steadily marched toward us on a narrow island. Earlier in the trip, we'd similarly encountered a brown bear. In that instance, we were glad the bear stopped, caught our scent, turned tail, and ran, but now we hoped for the opposite. A medium-sized bull led the small herd within a few yards of us. They stopped, sniffed the air, and casually ambled on their way. Wildlife encounters permeated our expedition. We were treated to sightings of substantial beluga pods, a bowhead whale, spotted and bearded seal, brown bear, foxes, and rare bird sightings. Eventually, we reached a point in our trip where we no longer excitedly blurted out, "Spectacled eider!" every time we saw a flock. Traveling by human power has enriched my life in a way that monetary or material wealth could never purchase. The Arctic rewarded us generously. On the far shore of Wainwright Inlet, we scouted around, looking for the narrowest place to cross the channel. For the first time since the Lisburn Hills, we'd been gratefully accompanied by a tailwind. As we prepared to make the final crossing before the village, the wind built and the skies darkened. Not until everything was strapped onto our small one-person inflatable rafts did I grasp how strong it had become. We decided to risk it. Halfway through the crossing, I leaned hard to windward, paddled for everything I had, and regretted our decision. Safely on the other side, I reflected on the idiom, "Don't race back to the barn." Many adventurers, hunters, and other cold, hungry, or tired people have made the mistake of disregarding safety when they are near comfort or the finish line. Impatience can have terrible consequences. Fortune may favor the bold, but long life favors the prudent. My great-uncle used to live in that sod hut, a Wainwright hunter with 2 field-dressed caribou draped over his four-wheeler told us. He was pointing to a collapsed but intact house site. Since leaving Cape Lisburn, we'd seen several of these traditional huts, and had always assumed that it had been hundreds of years since people last inhabited them. There, in Utqiagvik, just north of Wainwright, we listened to stories of this hunter's family and how life on the North Slope of Alaska used to be, not that long ago. Few stories or trail advice are ever as impactful or memorable as those heard on the trail. In the back of Peard Bay, I attempted to circumvent a short bluff by riding in front through hub-deep water. As I rode, my bike got heavier and heavier from freshly eroded, floating chunks of loose peat which glommed onto my spokes and drivetrain. Roughly 1/4 of the land in the northern hemisphere is permafrost, and it's thickest in the Arctic. Trapped within permafrost is more than double the amount of the carbon already in our atmosphere. As our planet rapidly warms, from our wholesale combustion of fossil fuels, the melting of permafrost is accelerating, releasing this trapped carbon into the atmosphere. This is known as a positive feedback loop. The outcome for Alaska, however, will be anything except positive. As I cleaned the peat chunks from my bike, I looked ahead at the rapidly thawing landscape eroding into the sea and wondered how different it would look here in 5 or 10 years, or even next month. I also wondered when Alaska and the rest of the nation would get serious about reducing our dependence on fossil fuels and mitigating climate change. Will we choose to take action before reaching a critical tipping point? Again, the saying I'd heard in Utqiagvik came to mind. There is no tomorrow. The time for action is now. Past Peard Bay, we knew there was one more obstacle before reaching Utqiagvik, the Skull Cliffs. We rode on until the sand and pebble beach turned to mudstone slabs and the walls of cliffs steepened above us. Although elders in Wainwright told us we would be able to ride in front, I convinced Kim to keep trying. We wouldn't be able to ride in front. I convinced Kim to keep trying. Waves crashed under our feet as we jumped from one slab to another until we made it around the first headland. Looking ahead at the steep cliffs with no shore below, we knew we'd have to change strategy. That evening, we camped in a beautiful sun-drenched valley, saving the rest of the Skull Cliffs for morning. As the wind died, the bugs came out, and we discussed our plans. Originally, we had hoped to continue traveling east out of Utqiagvik. We'd begun to reconsider. Before leaving home, we often look at the map and wondered how we would approach the vast terrain full of long bays, massive lakes, and wet tundra between Utqiagvik and Prudhoe Bay. This stretch would be the longest between resupply of the whole route, and so far, no one had offered any reassuring advice. "Maybe better for you in the spring when there's still snow and the lakes are frozen," we heard more than once. As we tightened the mosquito netting under our shelter and prepared to tuck in for the night, we resigned ourselves to a decision. The summit of Alaska, Utqiagvik, would be the end of our route, for now. Over the last 10 years, the fat bike and packraft have rapidly evolved in form and functionality. Both of these instruments of human-powered wilderness exploration were originally conceived and developed in Alaska, but the efficiency and practicality of both have caught the imagination of people worldwide. What can be done with a fat bike in conjunction with lightweight one-person packraft is still being discovered. On past wilderness trips, with the bike, I've been happy when we were able to ride anything more than half of the distance. On this trip, however, we were able to pedal more than 90% of the route, and often the riding was fun and engaging. Kim and I cheers pizza slices together in the first restaurant we stumbled across in Utqiagvik and continued to eat the whole pie like there was no tomorrow. Thank you for listening. Hope everybody's doing good, staying safe.